It's time for us to check back in with Louisa in the book Mountain Path and see what happens next. If you've missed the first part of the book, I have a playlist with all the readings, and you can check that out to get caught up. She was glad when Corey said something about it's being supper getting time and went downstairs. Her recent blunders in conversation had laid such a restraint upon her that she could think of nothing to say except senseless things about the weather and the clothes she was unpacking. She heard Corey rattle down the ashes in the cook stove, and not long after, the sound of children's voices in the backyard. She ran to the window on that side but could see nothing because of the wide porch roof. Uncertain of whether to go down and meet them now and get it over with or wait until supper time, she stood irresolute above the stair until she heard Corey call to them that they must go up and see Teacher and get the empty bed tick and fill it. She heard the shrill argumentative whispers of two children down by the stair door which Corey had left open. Then a girl's voice full of high music like the woman's. "Oh, Mom, I can't get Pete to come. He's afeard." "Rye, you and him come here," she heard Corey say. Then more whispering, fainter and muffled in the kitchen, breaking at times into low-voiced persuasion and argument. Soon, however, she heard bare feet on the stairs and placed herself by the empty fireplace to wait, carefully arranging her features into what she believed to be the correct expression. Halfway up the stairs, a baby began a troubled whimpering, and the girl's voice came again. "Be quiet, Beetle. You're a-going to see the teacher in a minute." Then it seemed that the boy must be giving trouble, for she heard the same voice say, "Come on, Pete. She ain't a-going to eat ye. Don't be a-settin' now." The next moment, a girl's head of straight, taffy-colored hair rose above the stair hole, and Louisa found herself looking into a pair of narrow blue eyes set into a small, homely, half-child, half-woman face. Forgetting the preconceived arrangement of her features, she ran to the stair, caught the girl's free hand, and pulled her and the fat baby she carried up the last 2 steps. "It's nice of you to help," the child said, "but I'd have made it. I'm used to taking Beetle every place I go." "I suppose you're Rye?" Louisa said, smiling without thinking it. "Yes'm. Pete, he's a-comin' too, if he ain't a-settin'. Oh, Pete." A small boy's head crowned with bright wheat-colored curls reached the level of the top step. "That's Pete," Rye said, nodding toward the stair. "He's just 6, a-going on 7, and ain't never been to school. Me, I'm the oldest one of the living children, and they's 3 of us dead. I'm 12, a-going on 13. She turned to Louisa and added in what she doubtless intended to be a confidential undertone, "Don't feel hurt 'bout Pete a-holding off so. He's the bashfulest youngin'." Pete climbed another step, stopped and studied Louisa a moment, and then sat down with the air of one who does not soon intend to move forward. "He'll get over it, don't you think, when he starts to school?" Rye observed, glancing at Pete again. "Yes, it will help him to play with other children. Is the school large?" Rye looked suddenly serious, older as if she might have been the mother of the baby on her hip. "No'm, the school ain't so big, mostly just we uns and the Hayes cows, just 5 or 6. "But there surely are more children than that in this district." Rye smoothed a hearthstone with the ball of one great toe. "Yes'm, I reckon they's more livin', maybe close enough, but they can't, since the trouble, they don't come. Mom said you had a tick to be filled." Louisa was glad of the empty tick. Whatever the trouble was, she did not want to torture this child with it. "I wonder," she said, when Pete had gone away with the tick, "if you could tell me where the toilet is. I looked out the window but couldn't see it." Rye scratched her left shoulder with her free right arm. After a short period of ruminative scratching, she smiled. "Oh, you mean the closet now. We ain't got none. Never needed such a thing with all the rocks and trees about. We women folks most generally goes up to the trees behind the garden." "Thanks," Louisa said. She remembered in a moment that she ought to wash and ask about that too. "I'll get you a pan of water," Rye told her, sliding Beetle from her thin hip to the floor. She caught up the hammer that Corey had left on the hearth gave it to the baby to play with, and dashed downstairs. She soon returned with an irregular-shaped piece of mahogany-colored homemade soap and a tin pan half full of cold spring water. These she placed on the hearth, and then she took up Beetle, who was just beginning to learn of the delectable music that could be coaxed from a hammer and a fire dog. "Well, I got to be getting on," she said, when Louisa thanked her. "If'n I don't get to that crib, Pete'll be a-getting cobs and shanks in with the shucks, and I'm a-aiming to fix you a good bed." She gave her a quick, bright smile and then went away. Louisa had just finished her first struggle with hard limestone water when the quiet of the place was broken by what seemed to be a great commotion at the foot of the stairs. She ran to look but could see nothing except a plump, agitatedly rustling shuck tick stuck in the narrow stair door. It had been better to have left the tick on her bed and carried up the shucks by the sackful. A man's deep voice came from the other side of the tick. "Keep a-pushin', ye can make it, Pop," Rye called, while Beetle gave a long gurgle of opinion and advice. "I'll pull," Louisa called, diving down the stairs. She pulled, and the man pushed, and the tick came slowly amid a great scattering of shucks and loud encouragement from the children. There was quite a delay while the man took time out to hunt his hat, which had become lost in the struggle, but by and by Pete cried out that he had stepped on it, and as soon as the man could get it on his head, the struggle recommenced. After a great deal of work and many loud admonitions from Corey in the big house below, the tick was at last on the floor by the top stair with Louisa and the children sitting on it while they recaptured their lost wind. The tall, thick-shouldered man in overalls and a torn felt hat did not sit down, but went over and kicked the slats in the bed to see that they were not broken or loose. "I'd hate for our teacher to fall through the first night," he said. "The bed'll hold her up, for she ain't so big," Pete said, and smiled at her for the first time. Satisfied that the bed was strong and all there, the man came for the tick, and they all got up and helped him put it on the bed. The children picked up the shucks scattered on the floor and stairs and put them in too. Rye stayed a moment after the others were gone and helped Teacher make the bed. They were spreading on the third patchwork quilt when Rye stopped, electrified by what appeared to be a disturbing thought. "Pop ought to have said something now about you being the new teacher and all, and I wished you luck and sich." Louisa stopped. It had just occurred to her that the black-headed man with the dark blue eyes and yellow gold whiskers, the color of his baby's hair, was Lee Buck, her trustee. "It was my fault," she said. "I ought to have made him think of it. Said something myself about him being the trustee." Rye shook her head. "This is your first school, and Pop, he's been a trusteein' forever. It was his place to think." When Rye was gone, she went to stand by a window and watch the twilight in the valley. She had never known a twilight so blue and so endless. The hill shadows had lain on the apple trees when she come this afternoon, and that was hours ago. It was past 7 now, and dew had fallen, and everywhere the shadow lay like blue dust, but there were yet no stars and no darkness. A whippoorwill called from the woods above the garden, and by the barn there was the croaking of frogs, and farther away the tinkle of cow or sheep bells. She was aroused from her contemplation of the dusk by Corey's call up the stair. "Supper's ready, Teacher." She went down to the little room on the back porch where Lee Buck stood solemnly at the head of the table, and Rye stood at the end with Beetle on her hip and a fly switch of maple leaves in her hand. Louisa and Lee Buck sat down while Corey busied herself with pouring milk and coffee and bringing hot cornbread from the stove. She absent-mindedly helped herself to green beans, pickles, cornbread, and sow belly. Though hungry, she was not thinking of the table spread with all the coarse fare native to the valley. She wondered instead at the absence of Chris. During the afternoon, she had looked forward to meeting him at supper. She wanted to see his face again and study it. Among his own kin, would he remain desolate and secretive as it had been when he was with her? She wanted to ask him, but was afraid to do so. Maybe he did not stay in the house. Still, there was a vacant place, and neither Corey nor her children showed an inclination to sit in it. "Everything all right a-comin' out from the Dixie?" Lee Buck asked after they had exchanged a few remarks about the dry spell of weather Kentucky was having. "Yes," she answered, trying not to show that she understood his question with all its implications. "Everything was fine, but I did think 2 or 3 times that I was going to fall off the mule." "See anybody?" "No, nobody but a boy." She heard Corey leave the kitchen in the direction of the front porch and return soon. "See him?" Rye asked her mother. "No." "He's all right," Lee Buck said. "You hadn't ought to let him gone out of the holler," Corey said to her husband. "Nothing to do but he must go," Rye broke in, as if in defense of her father. "I heard Pop and him a-talking. He said he's tired of never getting out and he'd take a chancet." "Mind your switch, Rye, and don't let the flies eat up Teacher," Lee Buck said. "Here, you must try some of my huckleberry jam, Teacher. Do they have huckleberries in the country ye come from?" Corey wanted to know, hastily picking up a jar of jam from among the miscellany of jars and bowls on the table and offering it to Louisa. Louisa helped herself to huckleberry jam, sweetened with molasses, and wished that Corey might know that she knew something of Chris's trouble. It would relieve the tension for everyone, she thought. She said nothing, however, and pretended indifference when Pete, followed by a dog that might have been a hound, came running through the big house. "I seen him a-comin' through the barn lot," the child cried, proud of the news he brought and forgetful of Teacher. "What of it?" Lee Buck asked, Pete somewhat crossly, glancing at Louisa from the corners of his eyes. But Louisa, watching him, thought that for the first time he appeared to take the proper interest of a hungry man in the food on his plate. "What kep' you so, Chris?" Corey asked when he came into the room and seated himself at the table opposite Louisa. "I went to see Hayes and didn't allow you'd fret," he answered, and was silent for the remainder of the meal. The others said little, and Louisa, unaccustomed to long silences with so many people about, began to feel ill at ease and to wish it were time to return to the loft room. She was so conscious of the men, the tall woman, and the quiet children, their leisurely praising glances, their scant words uttered in voices that were soft and slow and non-committal, and the steadiness of their eyes and hands and voices, as if they betokened some reservoir of primitive strength and calmness in the people that she could not understand or define because it was lacking in her own life. She had expected that they would be embarrassed in her presence, not she in theirs. Before the meal was finished, the Blue Hill shadow had deepened into twilight, and Corey lit the kerosene lamp and placed it on the table. In the yellow glow of the lamp, the faces and bodies about the table seemed stranger and more alien than in the semi-obscurity of dusk. Louisa, watching them against her will, felt that she and they could never find a common ground on which to meet. They were too different, a difference dependent not upon education or customs of living. She could have bridged that. It was something else. It might be the man that Chris had killed, or the old trouble that lived still in the minds of their children. Whatever it was a something that would always be between them. It wouldn't matter. She would live with them for 7 months and then go away and forget them. "Teacher's getting sleepy," she heard Rye say, and roused herself from the reverie. She caught the child's eyes, brighter in the lamplight than by day, and smiled at her. Rye smiled back, while Chris looked at her and said, "You have had a hard day coming all that way on a mule." It seemed to her then that those two, the talkative child and the silent man, would always be less strange than the others. Thoughts of them comforted her while she prepared for bed. She did not fall asleep for a long time. Pictures from her long, strange day crowded over her. It seemed as if she had lived not one but many days since the morning. Yesterday and all the days before yesterday, when she had lived in Lexington and had gone to school, were too long gone to be measured by time alone. The muskmelon eater in the square, the ugly forefinger, Cumberland, the huddle of houses on the river, the little faded woman, they too, though clear and sharp and colorful, lay in the background. The nearest thing was a tall man walking slowly up a ridgeside. his head bowed a little and shining in the sunlight. He came closer, and she saw that the sunlight had not touched his eyes. They lay in a band of shadow that, struggle as she would, she could not push away with her hand. So Louisa is about to spend her first night in the Lee Buck Cow house, the house of her trustee. So she's finally made it to her destination. She's got her feather, or she wishes probably she had a feather tick. She's got a corn shuck tick to sleep on. And she's finally there. You can hear the unrest and the nervousness in her voice, how she keeps reminding herself that she's only got to stay 7 months. She can do anything for 7 months if she could just make it for 7 months. So you can still feel that unease that she's experiencing being in this different place with these strange people. I really love the description of the kids, from the little boy that's really shy and backward. I was like that when I was little. I would hide behind Granny and Pap. If somebody tried to talk to me, I would hide and not speak, or I would just sit there and look at them and never say a word. I was very backward. I love the girl, Rye. I love with the beetle on her hip. When I was that age, I was crazy about little kids. So if I was at church or I had lots of little cousins, I was the one constantly wanting to hold the baby and entertain the little kids. I loved to be around little kids at that age, and so enjoyed carrying them around like that on my hip and entertaining them for their parents. I really enjoyed that, so that part speaks to me. Probably my favorite part of this chapter, or this part of the book, is the part where we're at the table. Man, wouldn't you like to sit down there and eat some of Corey's cooking? I would have liked that. But I love this part where she's talking about, and she says, she was so conscious of the men, the tall woman, and the quiet children, their leisurely appraising glances, their scant words uttered in voices that were soft and slow and non-committal, and the steadiness of their eyes and hands and voices as if they betokened some reservoir of primitive strength and calmness in the people that she could not understand or define because it was lacking in her own life. I think, and of course, I'm going to talk about Appalachia because that's where I'm from, but there's people like this all over the world, not just in Appalachia. I'm well aware of that. But when you truly know who you are and what you stand for and what you believe, you know yourself intimately and you're okay with yourself. That's what she was sensing from them. They were okay with who they were. They were okay with their lot in life. They were at peace with their situation and had accepted it and had a joy about it, was, enjoying their life. And that's what I think Louisa was sensing. And maybe Louisa, we don't know, but maybe she was at a point in her life that she hadn't really figured out who she was. She wasn't secure in that knowledge, in other words. So I do think that's a strength that you often find in kind of salt of the earth people, like I said, not just in Appalachia, but Appalachia's all I can speak to because that's where I've been my whole life. It's the only place I've lived. But when you find those salt of the earth people, whether they're really humble, living in humble situations, maybe poor by the world standards, or maybe rich by the world standards, but that's that common, I think, commonality that those kind of people have. They can have that salt of the earth personality and kind of outlook on life and wisdom because they are okay with who they are. They've settled inside themselves who they are, and that's okay, whatever that entails. I think that's common throughout the world, of course, like I said, not just in Appalachia. But I really like that part because, again, Louisa come to Appalachia. She come to the mountains of Kentucky with this preconceived notion of what she was going to find, and she's finding out it's just not like what she thought. Now, the people are strange on one hand, but yet there's this strength that she's attracted to and that she admires, even though she barely knows them. So I really love that part. And that may be something that plays out through the entire book because it has so far. So we'll just have to read more to find out. So please drop back by and we'll find out what happens to Louisa in Mountain Path next.